I haven't covered working as a pharmacist on the channel yet, though people sometimes ask me to show what it's like in a pharmacy. I searched, I dug deeper, I wanted to make this episode in a pharmacy, but I kept hitting a wall. In pharmacies, pharmacists are told, either by bigger corporations or smaller ones, to recommend some products more and others less.
Every pharmacist decides for themselves what they recommend. If a doctor prefers one company over another, that's just how it is. If someone doesn't want to study, they shouldn't pursue pharmacy. It's a very demanding degree program.
Can a pharmacist earn 20 or 30,000?
Of course. That's a question for the Ministry of Health. Why don't pharmacists have medications yet?
My dear friends, on the Do ROBOTY channel, I know you expected that we would start this episode in a pharmacy, but we're in an office due to legal regulations. With me is an expert, Master of Pharmacy Mirella Kowalczyk. Welcome. Hi.
Hi Wojciech, nice to meet you.
She will tell us about the profession of a pharmacist, what the educational path looks like, how much you can earn, but also about the regulations, why we are not in a pharmacy, and maybe that's where we'll start. What does it look like and why are we in the office?
Why are we here and not in the pharmacy? Well, first of all, the law limits us. In Poland, there is a ban on pharmacy advertising, so we couldn't make this episode in a pharmacy according to the law. This is quite a big limitation for us pharmacists.
While doing research on YouTube, I noticed that there is actually very little material about pharmacy in general, about working in a pharmacy, but on the other hand, when some material does come out, it gets a lot of comments and there's a discussion under the video. I think there will be a discussion under today's episode as well. So why? Why is there so little talk about it? Is this profession, I don't know, so unprofitable, uninteresting, and not worth talking about?
The legal restrictions that have been imposed on pharmacists for years make many pharmacists simply afraid of what might happen. The moment they step out of that zone and, for example, move into social media.
Okay, so let's say we're studying and with just one 30 or 40-second video on Instagram, we can ruin our entire career.
I wouldn't go that far. However, we need to know the rules of the pharmacist's code of ethics so that what we do on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube is transparent and simply in accordance with the law. It's an area where you can show your skills, but it's very limited and very demanding for people who run channels, but it's not impossible.
If someone wants to start a YouTube or social media channel, I can help with creating content on YouTube, though not specifically with pharmacy. The workshops I'm inviting you to are and will be unique, and that's because I'm the one organizing them. At these workshops, there will be condensed knowledge about creating content on YouTube, scaling your business, and building your own personal brand. You will also learn how you can scale what you do while working a regular job or running your own business by creating content online. You will learn how to overcome your fear of public speaking, for example, in front of a camera, so it's worth signing up for these workshops. The link is, of course, in the description, so feel free to reach out. So what does the educational path look like?
Well, let's start with the fact that pharmacy studies last 6 years, 5.5 years of university and half a year of professional internship in a pharmacy. After 6 years, you become a fully qualified pharmacist who can work independently in a pharmacy. Then, if you want to further develop in the direction of pharmacy, whether it's community, clinical, or industrial pharmacy, you can choose to pursue a specialization. The specialization lasts another 3 years. After the specialization, we can move on to postgraduate studies, for example, in pharmaceutical care or professional pharmaceutical care, which last for a year. Besides that, if someone has interests in other fields, they can do additional postgraduate studies. Okay.
Recently, I did an episode about a cardiologist, and let's say the educational path there was also long, and let's say someone is a doctor, someone is a cardiologist working in a hospital. I'm not saying this is worse or inferior. We are pharmacists who, let's say from the patient's perspective, who comes to the pharmacy, are basically seen as cashiers or salespeople. Of course, not to disrespect anyone, but that's how I see it. We come in, say, I have a sore throat, what can you give me? Spend 2 minutes and leave. Here, it takes 6 to 10 years of study to enter this profession. So, is it still like it used to be that pharmacists in these pharmacies are still making some medicines using test tubes and things like that?
Yes, well, I absolutely disagree with that approach to pharmacists. I'm speaking from the patient's perspective.
Of course you probably don't agree.
Yes, of course. Well, for the patient, it's just a regular sale. Let's start with the fact that a pharmacy is not a store. counter. This is not a counter, this is the dispensary counter, and here it's not selling, it's dispensing medications. This is the sale of medications. This isn't a roll, bread or butter. However, to do this, the person who is in this pharmacy must have it. So this pharmacist, meaning a fully qualified pharmacist or a pharmacy technician, must have the appropriate qualifications.
Exactly. Is this pharmacist also in some way a doctor? Because, you know, if someone doesn't go to the doctor but comes to the pharmacy and says, I have a headache, my throat hurts, I have a cough, I don't know, dry, wet, whatever, then this pharmacist has to, or just chooses something based on those symptoms. So this knowledge is still necessary.
No, of course, those 6 years of studies are not just about learning about vitamin C. We are not doctors, and we are definitely not heading in that direction. In my opinion, we are partners with doctors in the conversation. That's how I treat my profession, and that's always how I address doctors. However, when it comes to recommendations for the patient, the pharmacist must know the pharmacy's assortment. So SKU and about 12,000 products, yes. So I don't think it's just a store.
Yes, here you definitely cleared up those doubts, that it's hard to compare this job now even to working in a hypermarket or supermarket. Because usually every salesperson has their own department, whether it's meat or let's say bakery and so on. And they know those products, but they don't necessarily know what's on which shelf. And here, like you said, the pharmacist has to know all the products and know what each one is for, what they can offer. And here I also wanted to move on to the topic of recommending products. Do pharmacists and pharmacies have it imposed by some bigger or smaller companies that, for example, they recommend some products more and others less?
Yes. Honestly, I'm surprised again that people think this way, because generally in December 2020, a law on the profession of pharmacists came into effect. And it introduces a very significant change. A pharmacist is an independent medical profession, which means that, among other things, we can, so to speak, do more with the patient than before.
But going back to the topic of sales, Yes. You know, just like you said, you're surprised, I think the same, but I think viewers might notice it as well. That after all, pharmacists, whether in chain pharmacies or private ones, tend to recommend some products more than others. And that's just how it has become. That's why I'd like you to correct me if I'm wrong about this.
I think that every pharmacist practicing this independent medical profession is able to recommend the right product on their own. And what they recommend is, in my opinion, absolutely their own decision. Whether they decide one way or another, it's similar to doctors who prescribe one medication or another. Treating yourself based on Google searches or TV commercials is very dangerous. And here I think our role is invaluable because, among other things, at the counter we also act somewhat as educators. Each pharmacist independently decides what to recommend. That's simply up to them. Just like a doctor. Why does a doctor prescribe a particular medication? Well, that's also their decision, right?
Well, yes, but still, we know that doctors do get visits from sales representatives and reps for certain kinds of drugs as well. Because when we go to the doctor, we see, I don't know, a calendar from one company, notebooks from another, so it's obvious that these conversations are happening with doctors. And whether the doctor gets something out of it or not for what they prescribe, we don't know. I don't know.
So I wouldn't go to the extreme of saying that doctors only prescribe the medications from the companies whose representatives are currently visiting them or whose calendars are lying around in their offices. No, I think here it's still the doctor's decision. And if a doctor likes one company more than another, well, that's a completely different matter. So here really it's a vast topic and we could talk about it for a long time. I think that every doctor and pharmacist is independent in this matter.
And I hope it stays that way for as long as possible. I rarely ask this question at the beginning of the video, but since we already know how long we study, does that also translate into adequate pay?
Well, here I have to say that it's not. Okay.
Well, honestly, nicely said that it's not. So let's expand on this topic. What does it look like? I think it could be better, but what's nice, first of all, we have a profession. So let's start with that. Yes, that's good, since not all degrees lead to a profession, that's true. The second thing is that it's a profession that opens up a lot of opportunities.
We can work in hospital pharmacies, community pharmacies, in hospitals, in nursing homes, in primary care, at the National Health Fund, or at the ministry.
All right, but what are we talking about here? Is it minimum wage when you go, let's say, to work as a pharmacist in a pharmacy, or are we talking about higher amounts?
Well, I think that nowadays it's about 6,500 net on average for a licensed pharmacist, around 8,500 for a manager, up to 9 or 10 depending on the place, right?
So like you said, these aren't really high earnings considering the studies, yes. Because you could just as well go, well, I'm just putting everything else aside here, but the earnings are similar. You can just go after high school, maybe work as a store manager or in some supermarket, after high school or technical school. You still have plenty of room to grow in development, yes.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted. That's what I wanted to point out because I was talking about earnings in a pharmacy. And here are clinical trials, which I don't think I mentioned before. These are the areas where you can work. So I think that's a big advantage which you might not necessarily get after other studies. It might not open up so many different paths, right? If you don't want to study, don't go into pharmacy. It's a very demanding course of study. You have to keep learning all the time.
If someone dislikes studying but wants to be a pharmacist, that's not possible.
No, that's not possible. That's not possible.
So don't go in that direction. Watch other episodes on the Do ROBOTY channel. There are over 600 different episodes, so you'll definitely find something for yourself. Not just the pharmacist profession, anyone who wants to learn, grow, and improve their skills. Because there are always new products, diseases, and all sorts of things coming out, new topics as well, so you also have to stay up to date with these products. Yes.
Besides that, we have the requirement to collect points. We have 5 years to collect 100 points after graduation. Yes, yes, yes. And every 5 years we start a new cycle again. So we are constantly training. Besides, like I said before, the role of the pharmacist is changing. This pharmacy will, I hope, personally evolve towards pharmaceutical care. In addition to coming to the pharmacy to buy medicines in 2.5 minutes.
For me, it goes like this. I come in, my wife, someone else, or the doctor gives me a prescription. I ask for magnesium, vitamin C, etc., and it takes about 2.5 minutes. We turn on the hazard lights, the car stops, and we move on. So for me, I think for me and the viewers, unless there's an elderly lady in the line who talks much longer, then it takes longer. But that's how it looks, so I always see it from behind that window. That's also why I met with you here, and I'm making an episode on the Do ROBOTY channel to clear up all these doubts. What happens behind that window? And going back to the topic I mentioned at the beginning, do pharmacists still, like they did 10 or 15 years ago, make those medicines?
Of course, compounding is still alive. It's a hot topic right now in our country. I'm a supporter of compounding. I believe that this is the element that makes a pharmacy a place where, well, we can say that it's not a store. For this reason, among others. But
I still associate it with the idea that ointments or medicines made by pharmacists are produced in smaller private or, let's say, local pharmacies, and not necessarily in chain stores. I don't recall going to a pharmacy in a hypermarket and having pharmacists make such things there. Am I wrong?
All pharmacies operate under the same rules when it comes to prescriptions. Previously, having a prescription department wasn't required, but later a regulation mandated it. For some pharmacies, the prescription department is somewhat economically unprofitable because, for example, patients rarely arrive with a doctor's prescription for a compounded medication.
What is unprofitable?
It's unprofitable because compounding generates costs. We have scale legalization, we have HEPA filter checks when it comes to sterile compounding, products we purchase, raw materials that have their own expiration dates. For example, if we order raw materials for a product prescribed on a prescription and then for a longer period of time, in quotation marks, we don't get another prescription from a doctor that would use the same raw materials. Then we lose out and that raw material goes to disposal.
Now, there are fewer regular neighborhood pharmacies, with more found in shopping centers or malls. Is there still room for such private pharmacies that after 6 years of studies, because I understand you have to be a pharmacist to open your own pharmacy, are people still interested? Is it even possible to open your own pharmacy at all?
Yes, you can open one, but there are legal restrictions, demographic restrictions, and also distance restrictions between pharmacies.
So it's kind of like a license for a specific city. You could say that.
Yes, you could say that's how it works. This market is somewhat restricted.
Yes, we have X pharmacies within a distance from us, let's say 10 pharmacies within 15 kilometers. Some have only one product, and in others, such medicines aren't delivered at all. Is it the case that pharmacies always have, as you said, 12,000 products in these pharmacies? Is it, let's say, some kind of rotation? We order what sells, or how does it work?
Each pharmacy has its own specifics. So we have pharmacies located in hypermarkets, neighborhood ones, and those in clinics. Each of these pharmacies will have its own, so to speak, set of medications that it has available, which rotates most often. Currently, we are struggling with a huge problem, which is the drug shortage crisis. Sometimes people talk about it, sometimes they don't. It varies. It's quite a long list of scarce medications that are not available on the Polish market. So the very common situations now when a patient comes to the pharmacy and can't buy their medication are not due to any bad intentions on our part. We want to, after all, this is our job, right? We want to have these medications, but we have no way to get them, well...
But what does the availability of some medications depend on? I'm not in this industry, so maybe it's a simple question, but why? One medication, a capsule like that, costs 6.50 per pack, and another pack of similar capsules costs, I don't know, 650 because it's a specific medication and the ingredients are that expensive, the production.
Of course, the prices here are different. Obviously, there are different molecules, different research, different purposes, different companies, so we won't get into the price of the molecule here. However, when it comes to information about why there are no medications, I would personally like to have that information too. And I think that's a question for the Ministry of Health, why pharmacists still don't have medications.
So after all, it might be regulated at a higher level.
I think that simply...
Something is brought to the market, something is blocked. There is some kind of...
I think that the Ministry of Health is blocking it. I think it's just a bigger political and business problem.
That's why I'm not saying that the ministry will unblock something, but like you said, it's coming from the top that a certain drug is a bigger batch and another drug is a smaller one.
From the manufacturer too, right?
Well, if someone is already producing it, the production line is running, then I don't believe that they're missing some ingredients so they can't make 10,000 medications instead of 3,000.
I think that if you go to a pharmacy in Germany or Austria and just look at the price of a molecule like adrenaline, you'll understand the pattern of why certain medications are unavailable in our country.
Okay, so maybe you can explain it to me instead of me going to Germany, unless we just get in the car with the viewers, grab a camera and check those prices in Germany. I don't know.
I was really surprised by this because recently a man who bought the medication said that he paid only 1/3 of the price here.
It's pricier there, but at least the medication was available here. You can't be sure it will be.
No, we had it here, but it was very hard to get.
Because it was, let's say, at a different price. So let's say there are some regulations and it all depends on some big global corporations, which was also something you could look into. But getting back to the topic of being a pharmacist, I know you've been in the industry for over 20 years, and not only that, you work in a pharmacy.
Yes. Well, I actually decided to start my own business, my own training company. That's how I find fulfillment as a pharmacist. Well, but I think that in my case, social media played a role that also gives me satisfaction. Very often, pharmacists who work in a pharmacy think that this is the only path, but there are actually many different paths.
Earlier, you mentioned pharmaceutical care that pharmacies will be introducing or can introduce. How is that going to look?
Well, pharmaceutical care is a documented process in which the pharmacist, in contact with the patient and the doctor, supervises, let's say, the patient's entire pharmacotherapy. So what does it involve? There are various services, pharmaceutical care services, but the one I would like to tell you about here is medication reviews. A medication review is nothing more than a review of your entire pharmacotherapy, meaning the pharmacist conducts a structured medication interview during which they ask about all the prescription medications the patient is taking. Next, supplements, various additional products, and herbs. This information is entered into a special system. The pharmacist analyzes this and receives, let's say, some guidelines which she then reviews and provides feedback to the patient. What is the reason for all of this? Where does it come from? It comes from the fact that in our system there is something called a central record. When a patient visits one doctor, they get certain prescriptions and another doctor gives them more medications. When they come to the pharmacy, they choose products for themselves because self-medication is very popular in our country, partly due to the large number of commercials on TV. And all of this can interact, right? These interactions can happen. Sometimes patients have side effects without realizing they're caused by a specific medication. After this review, the patient receives feedback. This feedback can also and should go to the attending physician, and I think that's the future of our profession. That's exactly what I wanted to say.
That this is a golden business idea that you just revealed, which I hadn't heard before, and it's really great from a business and development perspective, and I think many patients would benefit from it. Now, as you're talking about it, a light bulb goes off in my head. Damn, I go to the pharmacy, I say vitamin C, magnesium, and on top of that some multivitamin. I take everything just to feel better. Does something actually work well with something else or not? I don't know. Could taking 6 different supplements that might not mix well be making me feel sluggish or making it harder to wake up? Is there already something that addresses this? Can you find it somewhere? Yes.
Yes, medication reviews are already being done. However, I would like to say one very important thing here. We, as pharmacists, are not able to perform a medication review at the pharmacy counter.
That's why I wanted to ask, is it in an office or is it some kind of room? Yes.
That's exactly why this meeting with the patient is necessary, and such a medication review does not take place on the spot.
What's the cost for the patient?
Well, the costs vary because patients' pharmacists do it privately, right? So, they range between 150 and 300 zlotys, depending also on how extensive the pharmacotherapy is. Because it's completely different if a patient comes in with 2 or 5 medications and something else entirely when a senior comes in with 20 medications. So the time spent analyzing this is completely different.
Exactly. Ideally, I wouldn't want to take away your competence or work, but I'd prefer a system where prescriptions for drug A or drug B by different doctors are all in the system. Artificial intelligence or whoever analyzes whether these drugs are incompatible in terms of their composition, and the doctor immediately gets the result. Right there on the computer. Dr. B prescribed it, but you already have these medications in the system, right? After all, that would be easy to do. Yes.
Yes, we're talking about interactions. That is, yes, we need to systematize this. Pharmaceutical care, medication reviews, pharmaceutical services provided in pharmaceutical offices, and patient care with so-called the window at the first counter are 2 completely different things.
But on the other hand, looking at everything you're saying, at the huge amount of work, the vast knowledge you need to have for 6,000 zlotys, well, and you yourself laughed that it's not, what's more, it's not, well, it's good to have as many pharmacists as possible because someone has to give us these medicines, not prescribe, but dispense, suggest, help us in these pharmacies. There are more and more pharmacies, more and more apartment blocks, more residents. We don't want to drive 20 kilometers to a pharmacy anymore. We want to have it, let's say, right nearby. Yeah, but still, it won't go in the right direction if pharmacists keep working for such amounts, even though they can develop in other directions, right?
Well, I think that, like I said, I still hope for the development of pharmaceutical care, that it will be an additional,
But it will just be a way to make some extra money, right? Like instead of spending 8 or 10 hours at the pharmacy counter, it'll be 4 because you know that you'll spend 4 or 5 hours on pharmaceutical care, right?
I mean, looking at the vaccinations that were done at the pharmacy, it was an extra boost for the pharmacy financially. Pharmaceutical care, if it were a healthcare service, would also bring in money, right? So then automatically the pharmacist could earn more.
Yes, but we still recommend it.
I mean, the internet, I definitely recommend it.
Me too, because every profession that is shown on the channel, those jobs, they all have to be done for the whole universe to move forward. So if you want to go into this field, start your education.
I'm not worried about this profession. It's a job with a mission. This profession requires empathy. This is a profession that, if you want to do it well, requires heart. Hey, AI doesn't have a heart.
No, it doesn't.
It's not empathetic. He will never smile at you on his own or say a kind word to you. He'll only say what he's programmed to.
But I know there will probably be some heated discussions in the comments. There will be a lot of comments, and that's great because there hasn't been a video like this on the Do ROBOTY channel before. So to sum it up in a few words from you, how would you wrap it up?
Bringing out your creativity as a pharmacist and using your knowledge in this direction to educate patients is also a source that may turn out to be very lucrative in the future. So you're saying
that if we have ambition and want something more, even a pharmacist can earn 20 or 30,000.
Of course, I think it's doable. It's not impossible. Okay.
We started with 6. If you've made it to the very end of the episode, you know you can do much more. You can. Someone who's ambitious made it to this end. Someone who's ambitious will also earn that kind of big money.
I think so. I think that if you're able to inspire, educate, or motivate in any way, that's a lot.
We're working on more episodes on the Do ROBOTY channel, and now you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Do ROBOTY channel. And I want to thank you very much sincerely for this really creative conversation. Leave your comments on this video. So what now? Let's get to work.